When a person thinks about attending your church for the first time, there's no shortage of questions and concerns that can run through their head. What about kids? What about parking? What should I wear? And sadly, many churches actually make this worse by not considering what it's like to be a visitor in their services. And so in this video, you'll learn what tends to make church visitors uncomfortable and how to avoid those pitfalls.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Tools, the show where in 10 minutes or less, you're going to get a dose of tips and tactics to help your church share the message of Jesus while we navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm your host, Alex Mills, joined as always by the boss man, Brady Shearer.
We all want more visitors to come to our church, Alex.
Of course.
Why? Well, because we want more people to hear the message of Jesus. We want more people to get in community so they don't feel alone. We want more people to find purpose.
Yep.
Wanting more visitors is a noble aim. It's a good thing.
Of course.
Most of our churches don't get a ton of new visitors. And because it's more of an infrequent actuality, we're not necessarily on a week-by-week basis considering what it's like to attend our church for the first time.
Yeah.
And that means when someone does come, maybe we're not prepared for it. And maybe now we're not serving them as best as we can. And attending church for the first time is so uncomfortable and unfamiliar for many, many individuals.
Yeah.
And so we want to talk about 7 ways that your church could be making your visitors uncomfortable, whether you know it or don't know it.
Well, Brady, I've talked about this a couple times on the podcast, just making mention of how our church has gone through this transition recently. In the last handful of years, we've seen a pretty big influx of new visitors, and it's caused us to step back and actually take that posture of, okay, what does it look like? What is a first-time visitor experiencing when they come to our church? Maybe they're coming to our church and they've never been to church before, ever. And so what is that experience like? And as we started asking ourselves those questions and kind of realigning ourselves with that perspective, it's caused us to realize, oh yeah, like there are some things we need to adjust here. There are some things we need to fix here because they weren't in consideration of the first-time visitor in mind. And some of those things are in this list, some of these 7 things we're going to talk about today. And I think they're really going to help churches who maybe are going through the same thing that our church went through just a few years ago.
So we're going to address each of these items in an invertive perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we're going to talk about 7 things your church should be doing. And if you're neglecting these, if you're overlooking them, they may be making visitors to your church or even prospective visitors that don't actually make the leap uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So the first thing is parking, kids, and dress code. So that's actually like the first 3 items.
Okay.
And the reason I'm listing them together is that you can actually address each of these items in and on your website.
Mm-hmm.
So we did an audit of more than 1,000 church websites from around the world, and we found that 62% of church websites don't have readily accessible new visitor information.
Wow.
And the truth is, when people are checking out your church, they're always going to check you out online first.
Yeah.
More than 90% of people search for local organizations online before ever making the leap and visiting in person. That's true for churches, restaurants, local professionals, and more. And so when it comes to parking, when it comes to what do I do with my kids, when it comes to what should I be wearing, you want to dedicate a page on your website that gets primary real estate on your homepage so it's easy to find. You can create a big plan a visit button. You can create a big I'm new button, and then dedicate a page directly to addressing these concerns. Okay, when you come to church, we've got parking. There's plenty of parking. You'll see our parking staff. They're going to be out there. They'll direct you where you need to go. If you're a new visitor, hey, turn on your flashing lights, your hazards, and we'll give you prime parking right in the front of the church.
Yeah.
And parking also extends not just to your website, but also to the greeters and your parking staff, if you have any, if you need any, just making it clear where to park. And then also letting people know on your website, what about my kids? Do you have kids ministry? What's it going to be like?
Mm-hmm.
Is it safe? Is it secure? What are they going to learn? Are you going to indoctrinate my kids with all these things that maybe I'm not ready for? What's it going to be like? And then when people arrive at church, they figured out the parking. You addressed that. Good. Now they're walking into your doors.
What do I wear?
What do I wear? Do I look like everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Do I not look like everybody else? Oh, I do have kids with me. You said you had kids programming. Where do I go now? Where do I go? Is it clear where I need to take my kids? Do I bring them into service and then you dismiss the kids later?
Right.
Or do I check them in with a kids check-in system and they go there right away? Every church does things a little bit differently. So you need to make it vitally clear. So undeniably clear what needs to be happening. And let's also acknowledge that this can be tough when you spend your days in and your days out in the office, in the building. These things come natural to you.
Right.
You have to get yourself into the mindset. from the perspective of someone that is completely unfamiliar with your surroundings, which can be difficult.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot, responding to people's objections before they have the chance to actually make those objections, when it comes to asking somebody to take a next step, responding to that objection that they may have. This is a very similar thing. Respond to those questions that they may have before they even get to your church, so they don't have to try and figure where to park and what door do I enter through, and then find somebody to ask where the kids go. Respond to those questions before they even have the opportunity to ask. And you do that on your website.
Parking, kids, dress code. What is a service like? We do this on our website.
Yeah.
We outline exactly what's going to happen in service. We also do this 2 minutes before service begins. Our host, often me, comes out on stage and outlines exactly what's about to happen. We're going to sing some songs. Lyrics are up on the screen. Pastor's going to be out to share a message. All in all, we'll be here for just about an hour. We've got kids ministry. Didn't you know? You didn't see on the website? You didn't see when you walked in? I'm going to reiterate it again.
Yeah.
And I'm going to repeat. I'm going to do it in different ways. I'm going to say it at different times and different mediums, but I want everything to be clear to you. And then we also want to acknowledge our guests, even if no one in your congregation is new that week because you recognize the 100 people.
Yeah.
You never know. You want to make it a habit built into the culture with your existing congregation that you acknowledge guests every single week online, before service begins, in service, in announcements, in your message. Acknowledge.
Yeah.
And then finally, I guess there's two more things. Second to finally, explaining Christian language. And this is usually going to be the job of the pastor.
You're saying everybody doesn't speak Christianese?
Sanctification, justification, dipped in the blood of Christ.
Oh, my favorite.
These things are unfamiliar and frankly obtuse to many people that are going to be visiting, especially as our nations and as our culture becomes less and less Christocentric, where these types of things you grow up with.
Right.
When we just assume this insider language, outsiders can feel even more like outsiders.
Yeah.
And you don't want them to feel that way when they come to your church. You want them to feel immediately welcomed into the fold. You don't want to distance yourself from them by using language that's unfamiliar. One thing my pastor does a great job of is not even using crazy theological language most of the time. If he feels it's helpful, he's going to define it in very simple terms. And even when we talk about the Bible, you'll start your message and you'll say, hey, turn to this book of the Bible. Verse is also going to be on the screen. My pastor will often go out of his way to say, and if you're wondering, hey, what's this Bible all about? Hey, it's 66 books written by this many different authors over this time period, and this is what we believe it to be. Just explaining even the simplest of things, because it's always somebody's first time at church, and it's worth it to make them feel welcomed and understood.
Well, as a pastor, I do the same thing. When we open these ancient texts, there are a lot of words that we just don't use in common language anymore. And like you said, if somebody's coming into your church and maybe they haven't grown up in church, they haven't been speaking this language their whole life, they're not going to know what half of these words mean. And unfortunately, if we don't take the time to acknowledge that and define these words, it can actually be a barrier between your first-time guests receiving the truth of the gospel because they feel lost. And so it's not beneath us to take a break and define these words if they need defining.
And then the final thing on this list, the mistake, what can make new visitors feel uncomfortable is asking for too much information.
Yeah.
Someone comes to your church service for the first time. This is a first encounter. When you start asking for, hey, what's your marital status and where do you live?
And your social security number, please?
Okay, wait, maybe we don't need that, but can we have your cell and home number? Like a landline. Who has a landline? Why do you need to know the age of my children, you freaks? We like our Connect cards to usually have 3 or 4 fields. Name, email, phone, and that's it.
Yep.
Really simple. You can always follow up and get more information later.
Of course.
Don't scare people away by asking for so much information right away.
Well, I mean, in what other first encounter with anyone would you be asking for all of this information, right? So it's one of those things that we basically only do in church, and it's kind of this church culture thing, and there's probably a better way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the only other people that do it are generally, the IRS. So you don't want to be grouped in that company.
Yes.
It's not fun. So the 7 things, just to recap real quick: parking, kids, dress code, what's a service like? What if I'm new? Explain Christian language, asking for too much information. All of these things should be on your mind. In my experience, these are kind of the 7 most important, the paramount items that you need to be considering to make sure you're not making your visitors uncomfortable. And that'll do it for this episode of Pro Church Tools. We'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss another video. Subscribe and like the video. We'll see you next time.